Welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we start Unit 24, Multiculturalism. And our topic is Critics of Multiculturalism. The multicultural analysis of culture-based discrimination in liberal democracies has received wide attention in recent times. However, its concept of differentiated citizenship and the accompanying defense of special rights for minorities has come under a great deal of resistance. There are four kinds of issues that the critics of multiculturalism have raised. First, it has been argued that the multicultural framework empowers communities and traditional structures of authority. It gives communities authority over the individual and allows them to continue with existing practice in the name of protecting community culture. This sanction given to communities and their practices can be and often is used to quell internal differences and promote conformity with existing practices and the views of traditional leaders. As a consequence, individuals as well as marginalized groups within the community, like women, are placed at a disadvantage. Thus, while multiculturalism addresses the issue of equality between groups, it neglects the equally important concern for equality within the group. Second, while discussing the question of special rights with minorities, multiculturalism assumes that each community is a homogeneous entity with a clearly identifiable membership. This notion of community further assumes that individuals have a specific identity and they can, on that basis, be located as members of a specific cultural community. This tendency to slot the individual in one community, the critic argued, may have been appropriate in the late 19th and the early 20th century. But today, the individual is continuously exposed to so many different cultural and social influences that we cannot envisage bounded cultures and communities. Besides, individuals usually see themselves as members of many different communities. For example, they may, in different contexts, identify themselves as Indians, Hindus, Brahmins, and women. Their concerns as members of each of these communities may indeed be different and at times even incompatible. We need, therefore, to begin with a more complex picture of the individual and her community membership. Third, critics also fear that multiculturalism may lead to the weakening of the nation state. By associating the culture endorsed by the state with the majority community, multiculturalism, they argue, undermines the very possibility of a shared culture of the people in the nation state. It thus threatens the national project and calls upon the minorities to distance themselves from the state. Further, the system of special rights brings into effect a framework of dual jurisdiction and dual loyalties. This itself is seen as a source of disintegration of the state. Fourth, theorists of the Marxist persuasion particularly argue that the multiculturalism neglects the issue of redistribution. It conceives minority marginalization narrowly as a cultural phenomena, requiring cultural remedies in the form of recognition and protection of minority culture. As a consequence, it loses sight of the multiple ways in which discrimination of minorities occur and manifests itself in society. In fact, its analysis takes attention away from the urgent task of seeking redistribution of resources and opportunities in society. Next point is multiculturalism and assessment. Each of these arguments raises important questions that merit serious consideration. Indeed, theorists of multiculturalism have in the recent past been attentive to those concerns, although it is not possible to detail the responses that have come from the multicultural camp. Nevertheless, there are 2 points that need to be emphasized as we conclude the discussion on multiculturalism. One, multiculturalism advocates special rights with a view to strengthening and not weakening existing state, based on the understanding that the threat to territorial integrity of the nation state comes from the ethnic conflicts within the polity. It tries to accommodate marginalized communities by giving them a voice in the political and public sphere. Special rights, including the right to self-government, are intended to provide mechanisms by which oppressed groups may participate and develop a sense of commitment to the state. Theorists of multiculturalism maintain that citizenship is not simply a legal status, it has a psychological dimension. Unless people have a sense of emotional attachment, identification with the state is not likely to occur. Special rights are expected to fulfill this task by providing avenues for inclusion and equality among minority communities. 2. The most serious problem before multiculturalism today is how to protect cultural diversity without negating freedom for the individual and equality for all persons. Advocates of multiculturalism address this issue by suggesting that the community must develop institutions of democratic deliberation so that the voice of marginalized groups within the community can be heard and accommodated internally. Others maintain that the state could prescribe a framework of minimum rights that cannot be violated. Within that framework, communities might determine how best to govern its members, even though the suggested alternatives are not entirely adequate for dealing with the complex nature of issues raised by the concern for freedom and equality. Yet, these responses indicate and affirm that multiculturalism is not simply a theory of community rights, even though multiculturalists have most often been concerned with questions of intergroup equality. The concern for intra-group equality is not absent within it. Indeed, having placed the first set of issues on the agenda of liberal democracies, Multiculturalism is increasingly addressing the question of equality within the community. The significance of multicultural political theory is that it has drawn our attention to the processes of cultural discrimination within liberal democracies and compelled us to rethink the ideas that have been cherished within liberalism. In particular, it has promoted us to consider whether individual rights, indivisible state sovereignty, and uniform citizenship can effectively ensure equality for all in a plural society. It is by virtue of setting this agenda that multiculturalism has today become one of the most influential strands of democratic theory. Now, summary of the unit. The concept of multiculturalism and the various theories associated with it have become quite important in contemporary lives. Multiculturalism addresses itself to the basic issue of discrimination in society, especially in the context of marginalized cultural communities such as the minorities. Multiculturalism, therefore, emphasizes group specific rights. It lays stress on societal or institutional arrangements for minority cultures to survive and flourish. Here we want to wind up this lecture and we have come to the end of the unit. Thank you so much for your attention.